So this is our, at least initially, somewhat shrunken developer panel. We're expecting 2 more people, but since time is pressing, we're going to get started. And we have here our Steve Plofker, who's with Gold Street Partners LLC, and Ed Martaglio, RPM Development Corporation, 2 of the more substantial and more engaged developers in this part of New Jersey. And as our additional panelists show up, I will introduce them. And you have their bios in the swag bags you received, so I won't go into any more detail about that. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to pose a variety of questions to them that hopefully they'll just sort of take off from and talk about in terms of development in Montclair, the role of the developer, how developers can contribute to meeting senior housing needs, and things along those lines. Sort of what are the things that they've done in the past that have addressed those needs. And then at some point, as Ann mentioned, we're going to turn it over to the audience, and hopefully at that point she will have collected a variety of questions on 3x5 cards that we can respond to. So let me get started. Why don't you talk a little bit, each of you, about kind of the work that you've done that's relevant to the needs of older people, and then what you think you could do going forward in terms of helping to meet the needs of older people in a community like Montclair.
So I'm Ed Martaglio, and I live and work in Montclair, and have been here pretty much since high school. I graduated from Immaculate High School in 1973, a long time ago. And our company, RPM, our focus is on affordable housing. And so we're a private company, but our work is predominantly with a variety of state, federal, county programs to build housing that is designed to meet the needs of folks that are low and moderate income. And I've been doing that for 31 years this year. And so we've built communities all over New Jersey. Not any in Montclair, I'm sorry to say, but a fair number in Essex County, but all over New Jersey. Initially, for many years, we worked mainly in the urban centers, but in recent years, we're also in the suburbs. I'll just add a little bit about the state funding programs and how they work. So we have developed about 60 or so different communities. Most of our rental communities are somewhere between 60 and 80 apartments. Of those 60, maybe about 15, maybe about a quarter of them are for seniors. The nature of these kind of developments is that they are extremely competitive to attract funding. So there's the basic program we work with is the New Jersey Housing Tax Credit Program, and that essentially has a funding cycle once a year. And I won't go through the complications unless you're interested, but the bottom line is that unless a town is strongly supportive of a development, it generally doesn't occur. So towns really have to work carefully and diligently to attract a developer by putting together all the essential ingredients. And those include such things as a pilot, that's a payment in lieu of taxes, so the taxes are quite low for affordable senior developments. They need to, there needs to be a certain level of density. A number of communities, especially those in the suburbs now that are trying to meet their affordable housing obligations, are now offering free land. So they actually will take you to municipal land or acquire land, and then they'll do what's called an RFP, a request for proposals, in which developers like RPM will compete to be selected to build the housing development. At the end of the day, though, one of the things, I should have brought some slides. At the end of the day, one of the things that is good about these developments is that they last for a long time. The housing affordability restrictions extend 30, 40, sometimes in perpetuity. And because there's a variety of funding mechanisms involved, the developers are required to put together really a holistic package of benefits. So there's usually a social service coordinator on site, a pretty wide array of activities. So they really can be quite nice, but again, they're difficult to put together. Funding is scarce, and it really does require a fair amount of political will, not just at the citizen level, but really at the government level.
Thanks, Ed. Steve Plofker, been a Montclair resident for almost 30 years. I am a city planner and an attorney by training, but a real estate developer by profession. I do the opposite of what Ed does. I build offices, stores, housing, hotels, but they're not affordable. Well, they're affordable to somebody. What we've been doing lately is we've been trying to increase sort of infill housing in Montclair, increasing density. We were at a zoning board meeting last night on a small site that they're trying to buy from a church just down the street on Plymouth Street. We're trying to build 4 townhomes. What I think Montclair lacks is housing for empty nesters, people when they sell their homes and don't want another single-family house and don't necessarily want to go rent a small apartment. There's not a whole lot else, and so we're trying to do this on a number of different sites. I've also been a supporter of affordable housing to Home Corps and others in the town, so we've created, I'm embarrassed to say how few units through my involvement, but it hasn't been for lack of interest, and we're continuing to try to create it. It's hard enough building for-profit things. I don't take government subsidy. I've never applied, and so it has a much different experience than I do. So
you pay government taxes, which are good.
Yes, we do quite a lot of that, yes.
Good.
I've explained to my children I love paying taxes. They said, Dad, why? I said, April 15th is a really happy day for me on most years. They said, why is that? I said, because it means I made money. If you don't make money, you don't pay taxes. So my goal is to create very high quality housing, senior housing, alternative housing. I'm not interested in building single family houses. So my work is either sort of loft apartments or more infill townhome type of things.
Well, what are the different types of housing that you feel that sort of the older market needs? You mentioned the housing for empty nesters, which is sort of a transition away from the big single-family housing. Are there some other models that make sense?
And I think it's all kinds of housing that's not single-family homes. I think that for the most part, for seniors, it's got to be one level or else an elevator to get between the levels. So the townhomes we've proposed just down the street all have a provision for elevators. Now somebody can buy it and choose not to put an elevator in, but there'd be a dedicated shaftway so that somebody that buys a house at their 50th or 60th year can stay there for 20 or 30 years without moving. And I think for me that's a very important thing. We also have a new project on James Street, which is 5 units. One will be affordable. It's a condominium, but they're detached. So they're like single-family houses, but they're in a small lot. They all have garages and very small yards, but there'll be no maintenance per se. One of those is a ranch house. The other 3 will have stairs, so probably less attractive to seniors. But they're small. They're 2 and 2.5 bedroom by 2.5 bedroom. I mean an office that's convertible to a guest room. 2 to 3 bathrooms, and with no maintenance per se, other than pay the condo fee.
Yeah. This is not directly related, but I do want to talk about inclusionary housing. So in Montclair has an inclusionary ordinance that took a long time to occur. And what that means is that any time a developer is going to build housing, there's a percentage of those housing units that are required to be set aside for low and moderate income households. I think the number is 20%. Is that correct? But not in every development are 20% of the affordable housing units built. So that's something that's really important as the township moves on. There are redevelopment sites in Montclair, additional housing being built. It's important that that 20% number be achieved.
The problem is that the 20% requirement is high enough to scare off most for-profit developers. It's the only towns that are successful even approaching that number grant something extra in order to get to it. So I've been advocating, and I'm not getting anywhere, but that it's a number that we're not going to build a lot of housing, a lot of affordable housing, because it'll scare people off from building housing. The economics tend not to work when 20% of it is affordable. And these are without subsidies. And if we look at the larger projects that have been developed in Montclair over the last 10 years, very few of them have gotten anywhere near the 20%. The redevelopment plans tend to be much closer to the 10%, which does seem to be a more acceptable number to the market, as I know.
Yeah, let me pick up on that point you made about offsets, something like about something, because I think that's an important point that comes up. If you were to say to the town, I could do 20%, but I would need something to offset those additional costs. Are there things that the town could do that would help make the numbers work better so you could do the 20%?
Easily. The easiest thing they can do is allow a greater number of units. Usually it means more density.
Always.
But these are very controversial issues generally.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the other thing they could do is they could offer a pilot payment of taxes. But so I don't know that it's not that surprising. I'm an affordable guy, you're a market guy. I don't know that I agree that 20% is not an achievable number. Morristown has achieved it. There makes it housing developments.
Montclair has not.
Well, has not. Okay. They have not because they haven't enforced it. It's really a question of political will.
We don't have a whole lot of development sites left. The reason you haven't done any 50 or 80 unit projects here is there's very few, if not, no places to do it. And so, no, as a private housing developer, the 20% number is very scary without getting a bonus for doing it. I don't think you're going to find a lot of it. The development's going to be pushed to other types of uses just because it's not supportable from my perspective of the economics, and I think that's supported by other developers too. The reason we haven't seen it is because it's a disincentive to building market rate housing.
Well, one question, I mean, this issue of density is coming up, and are there ways, this is one of the questions that came, was specifically, from the audience, was specifically on this question of how do we overcome resistance to both adding density in single-family zones as well as providing more sites that are potentially suitable for more large-scale development. Any thoughts?
I have no idea.
Well, I think that's citizen participation and political will, again. So there are parking lots in Montclair that could be redeveloped, for example, but that requires citizen support and then political will to make it occur. And density is a thing that it seems like Montclair is becoming more comfortable with density, at least at the market rate side. Why would that not be okay on the affordable side? I can't quite say, or on the mixed income side.
As someone that's before the Board of Adjustment, which is where these density applications come, almost on a monthly basis, we were there till about midnight last night. We're trying to build 4 townhomes on a site that is next to the church on Plymouth in South Fullerton. There's a 60-foot, the church facade in that along Plymouth is 60 feet tall. And I could, close to that if I build 2 single-family homes. I just don't think it's an appropriate location for 2 homes. And so we're trying to put 4 townhomes in, but everywhere that we try to do this, there's concerns about density. Even if we have one project, as our councilwoman, Ms. Baskerville, knows, we're one site that we're trying to put 7 townhomes on Orange Road. It's a small site, but it's between 2 apartment complexes on either side. It happens to be zoned for a single-family house. Nobody in their right mind is going to build a single-family house between 2 apartment complexes. We're trying to maintain the same density that's on both sides in the thing, but it's going to be very controversial, and I don't know if we're going to be successful with the approvals.
Yeah, I think going back to Ed's point about political will, I mean, one of the things that's interesting and kind of worrisome about this is that when let's say a developer like Steve has a zoning board hearing, or where you try to get the density changed on a particular site, or a zoning change or something. Typically, people come out, let me break for a second and introduce Richard Polton of Valley Research Group, who is our 3rd panelist. You now have a majority. But typically what happens is that the people who are against the change show up en masse and shout and object and raise all kinds of issues like traffic and air pollution and climate change and Lord knows what else. People who may think this is a reasonable idea are home watching television. So, and they tend to think, and if asked, they tend to think, well, it's between the developer and the neighborhood. It's not our fight. And so I think if there are people who care that there should be more housing options and more diverse housing options in Montclair or any other city or town for that matter, they have to be out there supporting the changes, whether it comes from a developer, whether it comes from a nonprofit group, wherever it's coming from, supporting the changes that would provide for greater housing options, whether affordable or market, in the community. Because, again, Ed's point is important. Ultimately, this comes down to a question of political will. Do the various bodies in the community that have the authority to change zoning regulations, permit variances, and so forth, do they provide those changes or do they not? So, Richard, why don't you talk a little bit about the work that you've done and maybe how it might relate to the issue before us, which is housing for seniors in Montclair.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little late. I have 2 roles. In my day job, I provide appraisals, research, market studies, expert testimony, etc., on issues of affordable housing and real estate valuation. In addition, I have been a developer here in Montclair, and many of you may have seen my latest project, the Montclarian 2, which is on Bloomfield Avenue near the Bay Street train station, right down on the eastern gateway of the city, of the town. That role gives me the 2 roles gives me a somewhat unique perspective, and I've lived in this area now for close to probably 35 years, so I know Montclair very well and appreciate the complexities of getting anything done here. And the fact that things do get done, frankly, is a major miracle. It's a tough town to operate in for a variety of reasons. Housing costs, as you know, are high. Everyone has an opinion. Mostly they're not the same as the people who are trying to build and develop. Everyone is right. So just as every child in the schools is gifted and talented, the same is true at the planning board. Everyone has got a unique perspective and they're absolutely right. So all of that adds to the complexity of getting anything done. And my perspective on this is that real estate development is very much the art of the possible. It would be wonderful to think about all of the great forms of housing that could be developed here in town that would serve the needs of seniors. And I am a card-carrying Medicare subscriber, so I qualify for as one of the peers, as well as someone who's interested in real estate. So the harsh reality is that meeting the needs of senior housing here in town, given the fact that we're largely a fully developed community, there are some opportunities for new development, but they're limited and constrained. Most neighborhoods don't want any change or any new addition. A lot of the ways that we're going to meet the needs of senior housing, in my opinion, are not necessarily development opportunities, but social and programmatic and other related non-new construction development. Maybe adapting existing homes for accessibility and lowering energy costs so that people can stay in their homes longer. But just to as a final note, I talked to Janice Talley, who was the township planner. There are a significant number of new housing developments that are planned along Woodfield Avenue, some of which will get built, some of which may never get built, but they're all on the boards. And my feeling is that new rental opportunities that have units that are configured to meet the needs of people who want to live all on one floor and want to be near public transportation and have a high degree of walkability, we'll find that those new projects and some of the existing projects that have just come on stream are their best opportunities to stay in town. A lot of people, I was talking earlier, are in love with their homes, and it's not a mutual love affair at this point. Property taxes are choking a lot of people who live in single-family homes. That is not going to change significantly over the next few years. Don't expect major property tax relief. Energy costs in an older home can be significant, and operating costs. There has to be a recognition that the single-family home that many of you have lived in for 30 or 40 years isn't the best housing option for you anymore, and that what you're paying in property tax on a per-month basis could go a long way to renting a brand-new apartment that's fully accessible and new and well laid out, and you'd still have all of them, you would be relieved of the mortgage payments, whatever you're paying to the banks. You know, so many people here are paying $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 a year in property tax. Think about that as going to help pay for a beautiful apartment and stay in town. Others have other issues. I understand that they may not own their own home and their rents are rising. Those are real world issues. But I think that just to conclude, to address this problem is going to require real hard thinking that isn't necessarily putting the burden on somebody else. It's assuming responsibility for your own well-being, your own life. That there's no magical answer to the housing crisis here in Montclair. If we're fixated on magical thinking. We're going to be ending up here another couple of years from now with the same, complaining about the same issues. So it's really time to think creatively to find ways to help people who really should be staying in their homes, to stay in their homes, or to become part of a supporting community that may involve, you know, the village movement that's online and help people communicate with one another. I think that's the message that I have for you today: is think creatively, think out of the box. The developers or great resources, they can't solve all of the problems because some of them are just detracting. Thank you.
I have a Mazda SUV. Is blocking cars downstairs. The license plate 164HMZ. If anybody here has a Mazda 164HMZ, please move your car. Okay, apparently not. Good. Okay, that ties into, I think, that's an important point. That again, you have to think creatively. A lot of small things, no magic bullet. I mean, that's fundamental. But that raises an interesting point you made in terms of the accessibility. In fact, we have a couple of questions around along those lines. One person talks about how Montclair has quite an inventory of older, relatively speaking, more affordable garden apartments that tend not to be accessible. And is there any way, any good ideas about how to go about making them accessible so that inventory would be more within reach of senior citizens who might very much want it? Another question, somebody raised the idea of inclusionary design. I haven't heard that term before, but the idea of houses that are, over their lifetime, are accessible to people of all ages and abilities. And are there things that the town could do to either mandate that in future developments or encourage or incentivize it? So any thoughts about accessibility, leaving aside helping people make their own homes accessible, which is a manageable, definable problem, about both ensuring that future development is accessible as well as going back and retrofitting the existing older housing, rental stock?
The only intelligent idea I have is that we have a lot of big older homes in Montclair that could house more than one family. Should the town relax the restrictions on whether they're in-law units, whatever we call them, much of our housing stock can accommodate more than one unit, and some of the larger properties could accommodate multiple units. There may be incentives created if the town would consider higher density in some neighborhoods. There may be requirements that those units that are then created be accessible. That's the only thought that has any chance of reality.
So we've had the occasion to take a couple of the older garden apartment complexes, maybe built after the war, so they're quite old. They were not handicap accessible. But in order to do the renovations to make them accessible, it's certainly possible, and that can be done in any building, but it's quite costly. So renovation costs are often in the neighborhood of $60,000 to $80,000 per housing. That's for one bedroom. Because there's bathroom accessibility requirements and turning space in the kitchen. So it often means that what was a two-bedroom apartment goes down to a one-bedroom. So that's one challenge for renovating garden apartment complexes. The other thing I would say is that any of the new construction all has to be accessibility requirements. So there has to be accessible bathrooms and kitchens, elevator access, but that's again for new construction.
Is that true of single family as well?
It's not true for new.
No.
Yep.
add one point. I owned 2 buildings, the Montclarian 1, which was built in the late 1980s, and the Montclarian 2, both of which are handicap accessible. Montclarian 1, things have changed. All of the units in the new building, the Montclarian 2, have wheelchair accessibility requirements, and there is an enormous need in the community. In the Montclarian 1, we have 3 people who are on those kind of mobile scooters that you see, because there are just so few homes or apartments that meet that need. One of the things that I would like to see, that I would suggest, is that even though the units are handicap accessible, the doorways don't have those push bars that automatically open the door. We're contemplating, there's a need for that. It's a little awkward for those people who are coming in and out. If there were a program in town that even provided a match or some support for the initial cost for that, it's not a requirement that the landlord do it, frankly, and we probably should do it. It would be a good thing to do, and maybe we even will. But if the town wanted to incentivize making more of the existing homes and apartment buildings available with a matching grant or some kind of incentive, I think that might be well received among property owners.
We shift gears a little bit. We have a lot of issues, and I think some of them are kind of interesting. And people point out, this is true not just in Montclair, but generally, most of the new construction that's taking place in Montclair is rental. And are there particular reasons why people are building rentals rather than condos? And this, the writer of this question at least believes, and I think it's quite possible, that a lot of people who are downsizing would prefer condos to rental accommodations. But most of the stuff that's being built is rentals. So I guess the two questions. Does the idea of condos, do you feel that there is a strong market for condos in this area? And secondly, what are the reasons why developers tend to build for rental rather than condo?
The first reason, I think, why people haven't built condos in over 10 years in the state of New Jersey is that there's been no market. For whatever the reason is, it's really not been a favorite thing. And a lot of that has to do with the supply of new rental properties. And a lot of our younger citizens are choosing to rent and not to own. Having said that, rental properties, as my co-panelists can tell you, are valued at such a high number in the last 7 years that the smart money has gone into building rental housing. One could spend $5 million building a rental apartment building or $5 million building an industrial complex. The rental apartment building would be valued at double when it was done for the same income stream. And Mr. Polton can comment more. So the money has really gone into rental housing over the last 7-10 years. Might be changing a little bit. I have probably 27 units of condominiums we're building in Montclair. Construction on the first project will probably start in the spring. Construction costs are very high, so I have to assure myself that I'm going to be able to sell the units and be able to make a profit. I think so. They have to be special type of housing, because if they're not, people will just go rent a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment.
The reason that rental, we've touched upon a lot of the reasons why rental housing is more popular. The financing for rental is readily available. Banks are very nervous these days about condo projects. because the costs are higher and the exit strategy is risky. You start a project in a good market, and 2 years later, interest rates have risen, unemployment has gone on, mortgages aren't as available, and there you are stuck with a unit that cost you, let's say, $300,000 to $350,000 to build with land, soft costs, and no one is going to buy it, and it may not pencil out as a rental project, probably won't. So for those reasons, that's one reason. And then, from an investment point of view, every one of us here and anyone else you ask will tell you that the effort and the cost of getting a project approved is so significant that you want to hold on to that investment for as long as you possibly can. Once you sell a condo, think about it, you sell a condo in a rising neighborhood, you as the developer get none of the upside appreciation as that neighborhood gets better. The buyer has bought the unit at what looks to the developer is a relatively low price, they've made some money, but the next resale, the project that was sold for $350,000 when the neighborhood improves 5 years later is now selling for $500,000 or $550,000 if things go well. So all of us on this end of the table are scratching our heads saying, why do we want to give that money to the condo buyer? We'll hold on to it, and hopefully things will, as Montclair has improved. And I did condo projects here in Montclair. Many of you know the Glenmont Square building on across the street from the Nicolo's Bakery. I did that 30 years ago. To be perfectly honest with you, I wish I owned it today. We did well, we made money. In fact, Adriana sold me the building. I see her here. It was a terrific project. But the people who held there, who lived there, saw the one-seat ride train to New York, saw the neighborhood upgraded. When we got involved, that neighborhood was really pretty tough. It's gotten so much better now. But from my perspective, gee, I wish I still held on to that building. I could get terrific rents, and the neighborhood is great.
Right.
And you know, all the people who were the next generation in that project did very well.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing I would add from my personal perspective is I predominantly built rental housing. We've done maybe half a dozen for sale projects, and I can tell you for all the work that I have underway now, we have a for sale project, 68 new homes in Oceanport. I'm far more worried about that than any of the rental developments. Only because, as Richard says, you know, when the market's going this way, you know, you can sell, but then all of a sudden, if you're at this point, we're not going to be in the market for sales till late spring or next year. If the economy takes a downturn, that could be, you know, there's just far more risk on the, you know, you can always lower your rent. You can only lower your sales price until you no longer are at break even. Then you have a problem.
The last reason that I know, and this is an important one, that developers are not building condominiums is it's hard to find contractors and subcontractors that will build condominiums. Condominium associations have become very aggressive, and plaintiffs' attorneys have become very, very aggressive in suing developers and contractors and subcontractors. So 80% of the subcontractors I know, when you tell them you're building a condominium, they want nothing to do with it. And so it really takes a developer to take more responsibility than they would. And for their subcontractors, and know that the likelihood is you're going to get sued for something and still go ahead and do it.
Yeah. As you can see, there are a whole lot of issues. I'll just throw out one more, which is more has to do with when you're building for a relatively lower side of the market than with the top market, but is the uncertainty about whether your buyers will be able to get mortgages. Because if you're talking about people, and this could apply to a lot of older people who might want to buy and may not have enough money from the sale of their house to cover the cost of the new unit, it certainly affects affects younger people. One of the reasons why a lot of younger people are going to rentals is that they're not in a position to be able to qualify for a mortgage. So that adds a whole other level of uncertainty to the developer, because again, the developer of the sales housing has to be able to get in and out reasonably quickly. You can't sit on those houses year in, year out, hoping that eventually you'll be able to sell them, because that costs you huge amounts of money. So I guess the moral of the story, Richard, is build condos in a declining market. Go rental in a rising market.
Just one other point for this group. Just here's another. Steve is absolutely right. When you talk to someone about when you start talking to lenders and attorneys about you want to build a condo, they're going to say, understand it's an invitation to a lawsuit. You're going to be sued, and they're usually right. I mean, it happens a lot. From the perspective of potential buyers and users, I'm going to go back to the Montclair property tax issue, which would really affect any of you who buy a condo. If you buy a condo for, let's say, $300,000, the taxes are going to be $9,000 a year, just roughly. It's a 3% tax rate, right? So there you are, before you've begun to pay for your condo fees, your interest, your principal, the furniture you need, whatever it is you want to do, you're going to be paying $9,000 to $10,000, you know, whatever that number is. Figure 3% of the purchase price. If it's a $500,000 condo, unless it's tax abated or some, you know, you have the exposure to face a very significant property tax, whatever that number is. Whereas if you get a beautiful new rental building, the landlord is paying the taxes, the assessment is based on its rental value, and the assessment on a per unit basis, while still astronomical by any standards of reason, is nowhere near what it would be for a condo. So from the perspective of particularly a senior whose resources are limited, you may not be, you know, your income may be constrained, or you know, you're on pensions and Social Security, the cost of maintaining your unit, including property taxes, is going to be a lot higher. Now, yes, you get tax benefits, which may be going away. You get the pride of ownership, and you get the appreciation as the neighborhood upgrades. But you also run the risk that when you want to sell, you're in a down market. So, from the perspective of seniors, I'm not sure that the condos mode is the best way to go.
I think, by the way, this last interchange has been a fabulous kind of education in some of the realities of real estate development, which I think most people outside the industry don't really have any idea of the different factors that come into play when a developer is trying to figure out how to make a project work. Because in the end, the bottom line is, if you can't make the numbers work, if you can't come out at the end with more money than you put into it at the beginning, it's not going to happen. And the factors that go into determining whether that happens or not are many and complex, and most of them are not within the control of the developer. So here's, which ties into, there are two related questions, and I'll read them both. They're basically, and I think probably some of the things people just said kind of point to the answer. The first one is, given that market rate large developments are being approved in Montclair, why haven't affordable developments been pursued instead? And the second one, which is, Mr. Martaglio has been successful building for a more modest rental market in cities like Orange and Newark. Can this work in Montclair? So I think it's really, in some respects, the same question.
So that goes back to what I said when I started, which is that the creation of affordable housing under the model that I've talked about, which is tax credit housing in the 50 to 80 unit type range requires significant political will. And those communities where affordable housing developments get built, either for seniors or for families, are those where the town has set the stage for development to occur. And when I say set the stage, again, what that means is the town has, in most cases, done a redevelopment plan and upzoned it, so that means that the density could be at the appropriate level. They are clear that they are willing to do a pilot, and a pilot has to be, again, that's a payment in lieu of taxes, so that's a reduced tax payment. The programs that we work under, the pilots need to be at 5%, so so it really requires a significant effort from the town. And then lastly, so we're building a site in North Polton, which is a very nice town, not too far away here. In that case, it's right across from the Four Seasons, which is a nice market rate complex. And I'll tell you what North Cornwall did. They acquired the site from Cahobandian, and they zoned it so that it would be at it's 55 units. They were pretty precise in the number of units they wanted, the type of amenities and the like. And they agreed up front that they would offer a pilot of 5%. And then they put out what's called an RFP, request for proposals. And I can tell you 18 developers responded. And the project is now, and because they did all those things, the town is going to get what they want. The developer, RPM, is going to be building that complex for breaking ground later this year. We were able to secure the funding because one of the things that the state looks at when it looks at whether it will fund a development is does it check all the boxes? Does it have a pilot? Does it have the right kind of rent structure? Does it have the right amenities? So I think that addresses the question. So really, again, it talks about political will and whether a town is going to create the opportunity for affordable housing development to occur.
I think another thing, this is important, because another thing to bear in mind, if you look at Montclair, and again, Montclair has a limited number of sites on which one can do a development that's similar to the sorts of development it does with 50, 60, 80 units. There are very few sites. Now, more or less by definition, if you have two developers trying to build 80 units on a particular site, one of them is limited by affordable housing requirements. The other one can basically build to whatever market is available, at whatever price is available. Which of those two developers is going to be able to spend more to acquire that site? I think it's usually pretty likely.
If I could just speak to that question.
Yeah.
I'm putting my appraiser hat on for the moment because we do a lot of analysis of what developers are paying for land costs. In the case of the affordable housing project, which Ed just described, the municipality acquired the site and the developers paying a nominal amount of money. Most of the affordable housing developments that we see throughout the region, throughout northern New Jersey, pay somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 per unit, just for the land. And for each unit they're going to build, they can pay about $10,000 to $15,000. Some pay a little bit more, some pay less or nothing at all because the town has acquired the site and makes that a condition of sale. For a rental project in the same area, developers are willing to pay anywhere between 40 and 60.
Market rate, right?
These are for market rate projects. $40,000 to $60,000 per lot
per unit.
Per unit. So that's anywhere from it's considerably more. So now you're the landowner, and you have these two opportunities. One is from an affordable housing developer, and your heart is with them. But then you get the offer for the same site. And remember that the affordable housing developer is usually going to come with conditions. I can't buy it until I'm approved, or the zoning is in place, and suddenly it's pretty clear if the site is attractive to a market rate developer, which way to go.
Which again points to why inclusionary, I mean, Richard's, I agree 100% with Richard. Which is one of the reasons why inclusionary ordinances are so important. Did I mention 20%?
I didn't hear it.
You 19.5.
Well, Richard, what percent did you build affordable in your most recent project?
I ended up building, it's a 40-unit project. After negotiating with the city, with the town, we ended up with 2 new units in the new building, but we extended 6 units for 30 years in the original building. So we ended up with 8 affordable units in a 40-unit project.
What percentage is that?
20%. But of that 20%, just so that there's no misunderstanding and I don't get called any names. 2 of the units are new units, but the other 6 would have expired in a year or two, and then would have gone to market rate. So we took existing affordable units, and the town also required that we upgrade those with new kitchens and some renovations. So, full disclosure, that's what we're doing, and the demand, as you can imagine, is very good for all. It's a good market.
So there was a discussion before, not surprisingly, the 20% is the appropriate number, and Steve did not think it was economically feasible, and I know you have a view on this.
You're going to put me on the spot. Yeah. My heart is with the 20%, but I think it becomes, to some degree, an issue of what support is the town willing to give to the developer to achieve the highest number. If they just say, we want 20% and all bets are off, you go do it or forego the project, that's not good policy. If they say, look, we understand that this has to pencil out, and we want 20%, how do we get there together with either a pilot or subsidy of some kind, affordable housing, trust fund money, or some flexibility and creativity in how they do it, like I got, frankly, from the town here, then it is possible, maybe extending existing units in the way that I did, or maybe, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, there may be some cases when 20% just doesn't pencil out, and then you have a decision of, do we go with a project that has 10% inclusion, or do we not? Do we just let the sites sit? And I hope that we're smart enough to find a way to get the best possible deal, shake hands, and get something done, whether that's 10% or 20%. So I'm being a little bit wishy-washy, I guess, but I think it's as I said at the beginning, that real estate is the art of the possible. And if it isn't economically feasible, if it doesn't pencil out, then you're not helping the cause and helping the situation.
So I usually agree with Richard, and this one I don't. I think when the municipality has negotiated down off of 20%, it impacted the marketplace. So clearly at 20%, if there's a clear, consistent 20% inclusionary requirement, then the market knows. And that means that the housing, land costs will be adjusted for that. What the marketplace knows now is that everything's a negotiation. And so, having done this myself a few times, developers are very adept at putting together a variety of financial forecasts to show doomsday on every project and why economic feasibility can't be achieved with a particular affordability requirement. So I think the message that that I think that a municipality needs to send is that there is a clear, consistent requirement, and then over time the marketplace will take that into account. That's not the message that this town has sent. First, it thought about the inclusionary ordinance for more than a decade, and then it passed it, and then right away it started running away from it. So I think that's the problem with the marketplace.
It can impact land costs, but it's not going to impact all the other development costs. And land costs are, fortunately or not a totally significant factor. Construction costs being the largest component to that, and so it still costs the same amount to build an affordable unit. And without some benefit of that, maybe you can point me to other towns, or Allan, where the 20% has been an achievable goal. I'm not aware of those municipalities.
I think there are actually a fair number in New Jersey, California, and other places. Most of the successful 20% ordinances tend to be in places where people can build relatively low-cost stick products. That doesn't mean you can't do it. I think one of the things that's worth looking at is, now, and again, the larger the project, in some respects, the more flexibility the developer has. For example, the affordable units can be smaller than the market units. They can have, less expensive fixtures or finishes. You can save a certain amount of money that way. But then, I think the other thing is that, and this is the problem with being completely consistent, is on the one hand, I agree, Ed, consistency and saying this is the figure, make it work, makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, especially in a place like, a largely developed community, each different development is a bit of a one of a kind. So being too consistent can be problematic. Just like I agree, being too flexible and being ready to give away the store is equally problematic. Somehow there has to be a balance there. I'm not quite sure how to find it. I've got a couple of other questions. This one, I suspect I know what people are going to say, but I think it's an important point because I apparently, guess I'm inferring from this question that Montclair does not currently have a rent stabilization in effect. That's true. And the question is, from experience in other places, what might be the impact of the township of Montclair enacting rent stabilization? Now I know it doesn't directly impact new projects because they're exempt, but it would certainly impact the large volume of existing older rental housing in Montclair.
I think experience in many other municipalities has demonstrated that it would result in a large disinvestment in Montclair and make Montclair a much less attractive place for people to build and to own rental properties.
Notice that Ed passed us along good one. I don't think that rent stabilization or rent control would be an effective policy here in town. The opportunity to upgrade, as Steve pointed out, if you can't raise your rents and you don't feel you're in control of your property, you're less likely to invest in the property. And we have a very competitive housing market. That one of the really great things about Montclair is that there are housing types of just about every kind, and we want all of them to be maintained and invested in. And I think that any kind of rent regulation would be a disincentive to maintain the property at a high level. And your rents have gone up in town, but not to the degree, I don't think, from what I've seen, where there isn't still a broad array of rental opportunities at various price points.
You know, I semi-agree. I certainly agree, you know, as a general economic proposition, that if you have rent stabilization, you're going to get less investment in properties. But the question is that always necessarily a bad thing? And it's one thing if you get people saying, okay, I can't stand this, I'm going to walk away from my property, I'm going to disinvest, I'm going to play the string out for a few more years, and then I'm going to walk out. But in the case of Montclair, even with rent stabilization, I suspect you would be getting enough rent that it would be worth your while to maintain the property, hold on to it, manage it reasonably responsibly, but maybe not put the money into it that would justify a significant increase in rent. But the question is that necessarily a bad thing? I'm not sure it is.
I think it's a terrible thing. A town like Montclair, if it doesn't continue to evolve and change and grow, it's going to start shrinking and declining. As we've all seen the change over the last number of years, Montclair and its towns are living, breathing things that can go either way. And so it's not, listen, it's been getting better, there's been investment that's making it better. There's challenges with that about some residents on affordability. But unless that trend continues to go in a positive direction, and a lot of it has to do with investment in buildings, investment in businesses, investment in houses. Unless we continue in that direction, I'm concerned it will go the other direction, where people will get fed up with the taxes, will get fed up with the bureaucracy, with the difficulty of approvals, stop investing in properties, stop building properties, and start moving out of town. And once that downward slide happens, it's much more difficult to reverse that than it is just to try to maintain the momentum that we have going at the present.
So I'll give you, my perspective is a little bit different because I work in the affordable housing, government regulated type of housing. So in our portfolio, we're only allowed to increase rents to the extent that incomes go up. So every year, HUD publishes what the median income for a particular region is. And in the past 5 years, the range of increase has been from 0.7% to 1.2%. So that means each year throughout our portfolio, we only adjusted the rent about 1%. I don't think that has meant that we don't invest in the properties to maintain them. But I can see it in some of our neighbors have not kept up their property the way that they could. But again, the affordable housing market is a different, more regulated kind of environment.
And my last comment on this, sounds like it's a way to increase affordability. What happens in rent control is that much of the benefit goes to people who don't need it. And we can look at New York City as a prime example of that. If New York City allowed rents to rise to market levels and use some of that money to support the people who needed it, I think that particular housing market would be much healthier than it is now.
Well, but they'd have to take that money from the landlords who are charging the higher rents.
Right. And you would through tax revenue, you would.
Interesting. I wonder if Montclair could do that. But here, switching gears once again, there are a couple of interesting questions about different forms of housing. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of co-housing as a way of creating kind of an intentional community. Is that something worth exploring in Montclair or trying to put together? And is there something would a developer have a significant role in putting together something like that?
I think Steve would be excellent at doing it.
Good luck getting it approved. Nobody wants alternative forms of And so I think it's a wonderful idea. I think all alternative forms of housing are great. You know, unfortunately, especially with co-housing, it means greater density than the alternatives. And so I just wouldn't know how to get that approved.
I think this is a question for Janice Valley and the planning leadership. If it's something that they would consider, there would probably be a developer that would be interested in partnering with the group that wanted to do it, or see if there is a market. But it's an unconventional ownership structure that creates issues with lenders who may not understand it, want to know what the value of their asset is. And as Steve said, getting it approved and explaining it to a board where conventional housing is hard enough to explain and get approved. And getting one less parking space becomes a controversial issue. Going to talk about co-housing becomes even more, just a mind-bending game. So it's good luck.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a half a dozen estates on South Mountain Avenue that would be wonderful for co-housing. I wouldn't, in my lifetime, know how to ever get that approved.
I think a lot of, is everybody here familiar with the concept of what people mean by co-housing? Well, you raise your hand, that means you are familiar or you're not familiar? You are. Well, it seems like a mix. Basically, co-housing is a development. The type of development typically can involve anything, I think, from about 10 to 30 or 40 households, where you build a community where each family has their own house or apartment, but it's typically quite much smaller than what they would be looking for if they were simply living in a single-family house. Because along with the individual homes or apartments, you have very extensive shared spaces. So, for example, there will be large areas where you would do your entertaining, where people would gather socially, kitchens, music rooms, libraries, dens, shared office space, and all the things that you would we do as a group rather than in your individual houses. And a lot of these are created, not all, but a lot of them are created as a result of intentional communities, where a group of people who share a particular interest or just know each other well and like the idea of living in a community together, come together and basically provide the impetus for creating it. And there are quite a few of these that have been developed around the country. The model comes from Europe, like most creative housing models tend to. And again, it's an appealing idea, but it would certainly require the town to rethink a good deal about the land use regulations that are currently in place. Another model, somebody mentioned, I'm not personally familiar with it, but the Montclair Inn, which is a nonprofit residence for seniors, which includes meals, laundry, and so forth. So I think some kind of supportive, or is this a good model to think about?
I think it's a wonderful model. I think that it does serve a need within the housing market here in Montclair. I don't know how strong a demand there is for it, but the kind of supportive housing, that's one type, but other kinds of supportive housing, group homes, as many of you know, we have some in town. When they go before the planning board, it's always an exercise in who can speak the loudest and the longest, and it's troubling sometimes. But I would think that frankly is something where there's even a greater need than the kind of Montclair Inn model. We need, given all of the issues that are happening, women's issues, drug issues, those kinds of small, intimate group homes can be really effective halfway homes for people that are needed. The only question is it going to be next to your house? Is it going to be next to my house? And when it's next to your house, then I'm staying home and not going to the planning board meeting. When it's next to my house, I'm going to want to know everything about it, and I think I speak for everyone here that it's one of those things that we're all in favor of until it affects us or your immediate neighborhood. So.
And I think Montclair Inn is co-housing with some services, but it's smaller rooms,
Right.
shared living rooms, kitchens, with an extra level of service.
Again, whether more of those would be developed would then become a function both of the local regulations and the local zoning, as well as if this is not as economically productive as more conventional housing, then it goes back to the point that I think everybody's making here, is that if the town and the community want to see different types of development happen that are not the conventional product the developers are producing, there may be a need for the town to step up and become involved in helping to basically level the economic playing field, whether it's by buying the land, whether it's by providing a payment in lieu of taxes, whatever the things are that are needed. Nobody should assume that developers are going to create something just because it's a good thing to have in the community. The numbers have to work. One other question, I think this is an important one too, and so forth. This is nothing to do with senior citizens specifically, but I think it's an important issue generally. When all of you build and develop, how do you approach the issue of green building and environmentally friendly construction?
I guess this is my lucky day. But I will say that one of the requirements that the town had in the Montclair 2 was that we achieve LEED Silver certification. And for those of you who are familiar with the concept of LEED, it's a fairly high bar just to get LEED certification. It's an even higher bar to get LEED Silver certification. And it did, we agreed to do it as part of a condition of our approval. It's somewhat controversial in other developments in town. We met the requirement. We're just putting the solar panel. We just finished putting the solar panels on the roof this week, and everything else has been signed up. It added a significant amount of cost to the development. My hope is, and the expectation is, that it was an investment that will benefit me in two ways. One, the residents who move in will appreciate the fact that their energy bills are very low relative to other properties in town. And my common area expenses, the cost of operating the lights and the hallways and the parking garage, the electricity will be provided by the solar panels and the other energy efficient uses. LEED is a particular program that has a cost to it that for their administrative overview of what's happening. There are tax benefits to doing things like the solar panels. The payback is projected to be relatively brief, to mean that the money that it costs to put the solar panels on the roof will be recovered in a relatively few number of years because of some subsidies that may or may not continue to exist in the current political environment. Otherwise, we'll all be heating with coal soon. Just kidding. and the lower cost of operation. So those things seem to be a worthwhile investment. I wish I could do the same work I was doing without paying the money that we're paying them, which is considerable. But I recognize that someone has to police the whole process. Whether that should be imposed on every new development in town seems to be something that there was motivation by the town because this is a sizable project. It doesn't necessarily need to happen in every building that gets built, but a lot of builders are looking to high energy efficiency and high this imprimatur of LEED certification as a benefit.
So again, my experience is a little bit different because I work in the affordable sector. Pretty much everything we built is built that sustainable energy conservation features in mind. We also comply with the LEED programs. Our last 20 or so buildings have been certified at the LEED Platinum level. Because we're builders too, we're the developer builder too, we haven't found that the costs are that much higher, usually about 5% higher. Not so long ago, we participated in what's known as a pilot program called Climate Choice, building a 7-unit senior building over in Orange on Central Avenue with a lot of energy measures. R60 insulation on the roof, R40 on the sides, super efficient heating and cooling. Our average resident costs are $35 per month over the course of the year. And we're now doing a development in South Jersey, a 70-unit senior building also under the passive house design, and it's designed to be net zero. What that means is that the energy cost for the seniors there will be zero. There's enough, it's built at a high enough level of sustainable construction and insulation and the like, that the alternative energy is going to, not every day, but over the course of a year, will bring the energy cost down to zero. But again, that's under a model where there's a fair amount of governmental support.
One area that we're not finding a lot of support municipally is in parking requirements. In our experience, both office, retail, and residential tenants are wanting less cars and less places to put the cars. The town hasn't really caught on, and we're still faced almost on a daily basis with parking requirements that are in excess of what the market's demanding. And it's a very expensive thing to actually create the number of parking spaces that are required in order to go through the gyration to convince the town that this number, and I think the numbers we're using in terms of per unit, per office space, per medical space are outmoded at this point, and I think that could go a lot. If we revise those calculations, we have more energy efficient buildings.
Let me support that thought by some practical experience. We are just finishing up the lease up of both we had the Montclair 1 and now we have the Montclair 2. And as part of our zoning requirements, we agreed to one parking space per unit plus 6 spaces for the commercial area. And that's considered a pretty aggressive concession by the town. We're not anywhere near a one-to-one demand. We're well below it. And that's because our location, where we are on Bloomfield Avenue, across from the Bay Ski Station, near all of the public transportation, the bus routes, etc., and just user preferences, people's condition doesn't require that we have one car per apartment anymore. We actually have a nice surplus of parking that enables us to have some free flow. But we could have, I know that other cities, and as things mature here in Montclair, people get used to Lyft and Uber, and who knows what else is coming, driverless cars, things like that. The parking requirements are going to be even less. But it's a terrific, it's a significant change.
Especially when you're talking about the kind of high density development that is applicable to most parts of Montclair, parking becomes a huge issue, not just in terms of the cost of providing the parking, but also in terms of what it means in terms of the additional land that you have to assemble in order to do X number of units. So there are a lot of environmental issues. We're close to finishing this. Here's an interesting question which nobody can possibly answer, which is what is the projection of the Mount Laurel housing mandate under the Murphy administration? Stay tuned. Let's see.
How are you the best person?
You can ask. Come on.
I've been asked it.
No,
I just answered it. I don't know. Maybe you know.
Cocoa's coming back.
Something will probably come back, whether it's COA or, there's usually a habit among politicians and new administrations that even when they bring something old back, they give it a new name. So that it's theirs, it's got their brand on it. So, seriously, I would hope that the administration would take a positive, constructive approach towards affordable housing and towards the whole Mount Laurel issue, in contrast to the outgoing administration. But precisely what shape that would take, I think, is too early to tell. If anybody has any insights on it, or what you'd like to see?
I can, so just the short background, so under the Christie administration, there was pretty much a deaf ear was turned to affordable housing obligations throughout the state. Under the Mount Laurel doctrine, every town throughout New Jersey has an obligation to create its fair share of affordable housing. Montclair's actually done okay in this score. And then the Council on Affordable Housing over the years was created as the administrative agency to see that that actually got done. Well, there's been a whole lot more fighting about affordable housing than actually affordable housing production. So finally, under the Christie administration, they ignored their obligations so seriously that finally, through litigation, it ended up at the Supreme Court again, and so it's back into the courts. And the court has taken, the courts, that is Superior Courts throughout New Jersey, have taken control over the Affordable Housing Administration. And over the past 2 years, it's really been, in my 30 years of watching this occur, it's been the most significant level of affordable housing activity, especially in the suburban towns. So that's why North Cole is doing what they're doing, and other towns like that, because all of a sudden there is now a court that will enforce what's called the builder's remedy. And the builder's remedy is something that towns hate. That means that a builder can come in and take a site, and if it's zoned for 10 units per acre, he can ask for 4 times that, as long as they put in 20% or 25% affordable units. So towns are scared of the builder's remedy, and now there's courts that are actually enforcing that. So over the past couple of years, I think 110 of our 300 towns, not all 300, it's 500 plus towns, but 110 towns have signed consent decrees where they are committing in concrete terms to a certain level of affordable housing production. Under Murphy has been pretty clear that he's supportive of affordable housing, and what shape that's going to take, we'll see.
But is it fair to say that those builders' remedies probably doesn't apply to Montclair? And anything that the Murphy administration does, in my opinion, Montclair is going to be relatively unaffected by that.
I think that's right.
We're just about at the end of our time, and before we break, I'd like to invite the panelists, if there's anything they'd like to add about anything that we've talked about or anything that we haven't talked about.
I want to thank the audience. I think it's remarkable. I thought there'd be a couple people here, and I see probably over 100, and it's remarkable to me that this topic, that you actually took part of your morning to listen to us speak. Thank you.
I enjoyed listening to Steve speak. Another perspective. Thank you for being here.
I think Steve's spirit is absolutely right. This is an incredible community that cares so deeply about this issue and so many others, but this issue in particular, it is great to see so many.
And Allan, thank you for moderating.
Well, thank you all. And just again, before I let you go, there's something that is sort of fundamental here, which is to make change happen, you have to organize around an agenda for change and make sure that your voices are heard. And I hope that this might spur some people to thinking about how can